Hi, all. Kinsey Schofield here with Richard Berthelsen, and you are a CTV News official royal commentator. And it has been so exciting to watch your commentary. I went back and watched years of your commentary, but what is even more impressive is you've served for governors general and lieutenant governors, and you have helped organize royal visits since 1978. I don't even think you were born then, Richard.
Well, it was my first summer job, actually. It
Oh
was working, it was the Commonwealth Games, which were held in Alberta, and Her Majesty the Queen and Prince Philip and Princes Andrew and Edward came, and it was a very eye-opening experience. Always knew that I had had an interest in royal matters and in the royal family, and suddenly I was face to face with them and organizing a visit. And it was an extraordinary experience. And my career has gone from there to many different places, as you say.
That's incredible. So you were in a position to meet them? Were you in a position to where you could say, "I really like them I really enjoyed their company"? Is that right? Correct to say?
Well, my jobs have always involved serving the royal family in Canadian context. So, of course, as you know, they are the Canadian royal family. We think of them that way as the royal family most closely associated with our country. They've taken a huge interest. And in the course of public events in Canada, you come across the royal family frequently because they attend major events in the life of the country. So, obviously, the Commonwealth Games very important to the royal family because of the Commonwealth connection. But, also was at the opening of the World University Games in Edmonton, which was opened by then Prince of Wales and Princess Diana. It was actually her birthday. They opened it on Canada Day as well. So I was on the team organizing official opening ceremonies, protocol at Athletes Village, victory ceremonies for those things. And then I worked in government for the Governor General's office in Ottawa on all manner of things. And of course, the royal family came to stay with us at Rideau Hall quite often. So I had a lot of exposure to them. And subsequently at Queen's Park in Toronto, we would say Lieutenant Governor, not Lieutenant Governor, but yeah,
Sorry, that
but
I don't know. I don't know
yeah,
if that's the southern accent in me or that's just completely ignorant, but thank you for correcting me. I
yeah.
appreciate
In
that.
in the Commonwealth, we refer to them as lieutenants. But um, so yeah, so the Lieutenant Governor represents the sovereign in a Canadian province. So again, you had a lot of involvement, and I also had a lot of interaction with various members of the royal family, both kind of a bit on their off time, but also very much in their official time, and also a lot of work with their officials. So I really understand how the palace looks at things and how officials around the royal family look at things. So it's been a very interesting career, and now I share some, but not all of that knowledge with interviews that I give for Canadian broadcasting and other broadcasters around the world as well.
I love is it fair to say you're a monarchist? Because one of the things I really appreciated over the last 5 years specifically is honestly watching you defend the royal family on television over some very, in my personal opinion, some potentially very damaging and cruel accusations. So am I crossing the line by saying I think that you might be a monarchist?
I am a monarchist. I think it's a very good system of government. I think it's really good to separate the head of state and head of government. That's not, of course, the way things are done in the United States, where you have a fusion of those two positions.
I didn't
But
fight the, I did I had I would have probably been on the other side. Okay. Can I
well, you've done your best in America to create a monarchy around the presidency. I'll say that, especially when families start, subsequent generations also start running for president. It really kind of creates that same thing. But I think for us, I think in Canada, there's also another issue, which is, we have a very long attachment to the crown. And before the British crown, it was the French crown. And even with our Indigenous peoples, some of them really governed themselves according to monarchical principles. There was hereditary chieftainships in some Indigenous cultures. So it's a system of government that's very well entrenched in Canadian society. So I think it makes sense for Canada. I think if we were starting from scratch today, it's probably not the system of government we would choose, but we're not starting from scratch. We're starting from a whole history of how we got to this point. Also, I think, our loyalty to the crown and our involvement with the crown, it has the feeling of a very long association. So it's in a relatively new country, it still has that association, and I think we've seen that play out in recent days in Ottawa.
Absolutely. Did this royal visit strengthen the bond between Canada and the monarchy on a scale of 1 to 5? How successful did you feel like this visit was?
I think this visit was probably about a 4, maybe in success. I think not unlike Americans, I think, the king is most well known to many people for a failed marriage, problems with his sons, particularly one of them who's now moved to the United States. I think that's how he's well known. I think in the United Kingdom and maybe some other places, he's a bit more well known for the body of his work and his work as a charitable entrepreneur, creating a body of work with the Prince's Trust and the related organizations that are part of it over the course of his life, ever since he's left the Navy, which is approaching 50 years now. So I think in Canada, he's still not as well known for that. And so when he came to the throne, I think there was really open questions about, how good a king he would be, how committed he would be to Canada, even though he's been here 19 times since the age of 21. Um, and that has really, I think, been challenged in the last few days because it was a very challenging diplomatic situation that he's trying to straddle, coming to Canada at what is a very sensitive time for us, where there's varying opinions about our future. And there's been a view expressed by the president in the United States. And, maybe the British haven't been quite as enthusiastic in their support of the Canadian position as we would like in Canada. So that has created a very difficult situation for him. And I think the way he navigated it, I think, was very well received by many Canadians. And I think in particular, the mere notion that within a month of an election, he would appear in Canada for a 24-hour visit, given that it probably had to be shoehorned into his schedule because his schedule is done very far in advance, given his own health challenges, I think that really stands him in good stead. So I think the monarchy's in a little more positive position than it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. Obviously, there are still questions in Canada about whether we should retain this link to the crown. And the situation we're in right now has raised a lot of questions about the difficulties in one person wearing 15 different crowns. I don't think it's well understood that he is king of 15 different countries, and he has a different legal character and a different constitutional character. And those, everyone thinks of him as the King of England, which is, of course, a title we haven't used since 1707. But I think it's very important to understand that he is really 15 people in one, and he will do things in Canada and speak in Canada in a way that he would not speak in the United Kingdom about things, or Australia, or New Zealand, or Jamaica, or Papua New Guinea, or the other realms and territories of which he is the sovereign. So that's a complex situation to understand in the modern world. And there are, of course, people who think that should change. In addition, in Canada, we have a strong French fact. In Quebec, 35% of our population, there's, very little support for the monarchy in Quebec, um, just for historical reasons, because the British conquered the French, and there's a lingering over aura from that. And again, there's been issues with the Indigenous people, how the treaties were signed and not honored, and different Indigenous people have different views about the crown. So all of those things make it challenging. I think that it's a little less challenging after this week. And I think the king is off to a very good start in what was his first visit to Canada as sovereign.
We'll discuss more surrounding the importance of the king's visit and what it represents. But what is your observation when it comes to President Trump and the royal family? It seems to me like he is incredibly eager to have their approval.
Yes, I think he's enamored with them. He
Yes, yeah,
certainly
a great word.
appreciates the real estate that they have because that's the paradigm that he looks at things. I think, Windsor Castle is impressive to him. Buckingham Palace is impressive to him. Some of the other royal residences would be impressive because they have great mystique and they're iconic places. So I think he's interested in that. I think he, also has enjoyed interactions that he had with the late Queen, obviously with the current king. Other members of the royal family think he admires them, as many Americans do. I mean, I don't think that's really, a surprise to anyone. I think sometimes people confuse the warmth and politeness of the royal family with friendship.
Hmm.
They are doing a job. This is their role, this is their life. They do that job exceptionally well. And I think some people confuse that kind of warmth and welcome and sometimes vulnerability, and they're quite frank and disarming when they speak to you personally, when the cameras are off. And I think some people confuse that. I mean, their own friends and their family are a completely separate concept to the people they deal with in the course of their work. And I think that's how I would interpret that. And I think maybe the president has fallen a bit into that. But of course, the king would see his role as maintaining good relationships with almost all heads of state in the world, not just the president of the United States.
That's such a good point because I was saying just watching what I saw in Canada, even when he invited after Donald Trump dismissed Zelensky from the White House, immediately inviting Zelensky. It's too soon to talk legacy, but there's a piece of me that feels like I'm watching a peacemaker, that a piece of me that feels like I'm watching somebody that just wants everybody to get along. And I really admire that.
Yeah, I think the king really sees his role as a global leader in convening people, bringing them together, finding a place for them to chat and get along with people, each other. And I think he sees that for his own people as well. Like he's very interested in the convening power of the crown. It's something we talk about quite a lot. It's only the king that can get all these people in the room together sometimes, even within Canada on an issue, be it the environment, be it youth employment, be it Indigenous languages, be it support to veterans following their service, all the myriad things that he has done in his charitable entrepreneurship. So I think he sees that by extension on the global stage. I think that there's a personal aspect to it, but there's also what he's advised by his government to do. So he's not inviting Mr. Zelensky to come just on his own whim. That is something that is worked through the British government. And if he's visiting a country or if he's inviting President Trump for a state visit, that is on the advice of his UK government. Now, his Canadian government may feel differently about some of those things. Um, I don't know that the king always separates in his mind that he's a multiple personality individual. He's got all these different legal personalities, but you know, and the public, I think, don't necessarily see that. But I mean, the way the king operates in the United Kingdom is not necessarily the way he would operate if the government of Canada is involved. And we've been involved in things like that before. That's nothing new. I mean, if you look at the Iraq War, Britain was fighting in Iraq, Canada wasn't. If you look at Afghanistan, Canada was there with the UK, with the US. If you look at Grenada in 1984, when the United States invaded, that was the Queen's realm. She wasn't terribly happy that that took place. And there were some consequences in the relationship for a period of time. That, they got over that. Obviously, Grenada was restored to be a democracy under the Queen at the time. What happened after that? The Queen went to Grenada and opened Parliament shortly after that. So you see these kind of things are these things that this moment we're going through is not something that we have not experienced before in other issues. In terms of the king being put in a position where there's different perspectives of the governments that he is responsible for.
You wrote an incredible piece for CTV News, and I had never heard this before, but you talk about how the speech that he gave at Parliament was actually written for him, but he's
Right.
given the option to add up to like 400 words, I believe you wrote.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit because you said you did hear the king's voice in some of the speech. Can you, off the top of your head, can you tell me some of those highlights where you felt, yeah, that's King Charles?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, we don't really know, and we won't know until those documents are made public in many, many years, what percentage. But the government does allow the king or the king's representative if the king's not here, which is most of the time in Canada, to add a little personal touch at the beginning or the end. And we saw that with Queen Elizabeth II when she opened Canadian Parliament twice. She opened many of the other Commonwealth parliaments as well, at least once or twice. New Zealand 7 times actually. So if you look at the paragraphs, the first 8 to 10 paragraphs sound to me like the kind of things the king would have wanted to say. He talked about how pleased he was to be in Canada. He referred to his late mother. He referred to this visit. He talked about reconciliation with the Aboriginal people. He talked about the things, the military anniversaries that we're marking in Canada that he was proud of. And at the end of the speech, he made this very dramatic statement that Canada is indeed the true north, strong and free.
Mm.
And that is probably something that either was put to him or it's something he would have agreed to say. It wasn't a statement of government policy, but it was really something that had extreme resonance because it's a line from our national anthem, and Canadians think of us as being a northern country. The true north, strong and free is the thing. But this the point of when he added indeed in that. Indeed is the kind of word he would use, right? So that's when you start to kind of look at the language and you say that's the kind of thing he would say. So I think, again, the government is responsible for a throne speech, or what you would say in the United States, it's kind of like a State of the Union address. The government writes that speech. It comes from the mouth of the king or the voice of the king or the governor general if the king is not present, which is most of the time. But it is their words. They are responsible for it. They have to take accountability for it if there's errors in it or there's mistakes or people don't agree with it. And ultimately, that is a really big important part of the parliamentary feature because in Canada, as in most of the Commonwealth, Parliament can't start doing business until they've heard a speech that says why they're there. They have to, like, we call the Parliament together, but to start their work, we have to say, okay, this is why I've called you. And that dates back 500 or 600 years of our constitutional history. And really, the Americans, when they developed their constitution, they really did the same thing. That was their function of the State of the Union address, was to really put forward why it is Congress is meeting.
Did you listen to that speech and say, this is exactly the tone? And do you feel like the American government heard it loud and clear?
Hard to say. I would say their embassy in Ottawa probably followed it very closely, maybe more closely than it would have maybe be some years. Although, I mean, all embassies follow the throne speech here because they see it as a very major statement of government policy. So they report to their capitals and say, this is the way the government of Canada seems to be going on this issue, or these are what the government priorities are. So I'm sure it's been very carefully reported through the embassy, the State Department, through the American media, and whether or not the president has read it or is aware of some of the words or the tone of it. Hard to say. I would say it's possible that that's the case, particularly because he chose to send out a social media post last night as well, which kind of put the whole issue back into the, you know, very hot water. But I think there was a statement, and certainly the ambassador in here, the new ambassador from the United States who was appointed by President Trump, he did make some comments in recent weeks that said, "Well, we have heard you loud and clear. You didn't have to call the king to come over to make this point. We actually heard it." Maybe, maybe not. In any case, the king has made some comments. They were very tactful. They were very dignified. They were very coded, but they also, for Canadians, they were clear what he was saying.
Absolutely. Now, you said in your article, in view of the response of Canadians, it is not likely going to be long before the king and queen are asked to return. That gives me, I mean, that to me says the media response was great. And obviously, the king does love Canada. I think that that was a great way for you to end your article. It gives me confidence in another visit. Maybe not necessarily the soonest, but surely he's looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah, we had expected the king last year because Canada is the most senior member of the Commonwealth of 58, 57 nations. We, as the senior most, we expected him in his first year or two to come before he went to Australia or other places. That wasn't possible because of scheduling and obviously his cancer diagnosis. So he ended up going to Australia first. That was not a popular thing that he didn't come here in the first year. So that visit last year was planned to be much longer than a 24-hour visit.
Hmm.
The king himself, I think, would not have come for such a short period of time if it were not the circumstances we were in. So I think we will see him again. He's been many times to Ottawa. I'm sure he was not best pleased to return to Ottawa for what I think is his 10th or 11th time with the nation's capital. He recognizes that there's a lot of other things going on in Canada besides just Ottawa. So I think he wants to get around out into the rest of the country, as he has throughout his life since his first visit in 1970. So I think we will see him again, and I think because of the success of the visit, because of the response from the Canadian people, which, I mean, again, the streets were full. There was many welcoming crowds who were very, very positive. I think it's more likely you'll see him sooner than later, and I think we will see him for a longer period of time. Whether we will see him for another 20 visits, I doubt that because he is, the age he is right now.
I loved the way you worded this. This very short visit and the reading of the throne speech taking place as it did in these times of uncertainty and anxiety proved a tonic and provided a moment of rare unity and joy. I mean, if I'm the palace and I'm reading these words, I'm saying, we did it. How do we do this over and over again, copy and paste? Because that's a slam dunk, that endorsement from you.
Yeah, I think that is the case. I think we've had a difficult few months with our relationships with our friends to the south, and that friendship has been very, very important to Canadians. It's been difficult to see which allies have lined up in our support. That and again, a few surprises for us as to who came to our aid and who didn't. So this really, I think, was a very important moment in terms of Canadians feeling good about themselves and good about their institutions, because we're in a time where our institutions, I don't care what country you're in, our democratic institutions are under a lot of attack, a lot of question, a lot of scrutiny. Uh, he has really, I think, done a favor to the institution, showing what it is capable of, that it is capable of speaking in these kinds of moments. And I think the response was what it was. I mean, that is a genuine response from the Canadian people that we saw on the streets of Ottawa these last few days.
This trip was so important. And one of the questions I had to answer over and over again over the last few weeks was, do we think he'll stop in America and see Prince Harry? And I said, I don't think so. I think that there is a much bigger objective here, and he's going to execute that, and he's going to get back home. I've watched a lot of your commentary on Harry and Meghan. I watched you talk about Megxit. What are your thoughts on their decision to move to the United States? Do you think that they regret moving to the United States? And could they have, not that they've accomplished a lot, but could they have done what they have done in Canada? Or did they need Hollywood? Did they need to be 2 hours from LA?
Hmm. Hmm.
Could Megan be canning jam? Is wherever? I don't know.
I don't think so. I mean, the Canadian market is obviously a lot smaller, and our approach to dealing with celebrities and things like that is very different. So I don't think it was possible. I think it was possible for them to do some things that they're interested in within the royal family. Obviously, not making jam, but although the king makes jam
Yeah.
really through the Duchy original, so it is possible to do those things. But and of course, the Duchess, when she was in the royal family, she did this cookbook with people, as you know, and she did some things like that. I think it was possible for some of those things to have happened. The way it turned out is, really a tragedy, and I think it's really unfortunate, and it's hard for me to see the way for it to be repaired, given the book, given the Netflix series, given the court cases, which keep so many stories alive in the media that would otherwise have died. I just don't really understand. It's hard for me to understand the strategy, aside from saying these are two people that really didn't want the life that the royal family has. They really, I mean, I often say to people that the fences around the palaces are not so much to keep people out, they're to keep the occupants in.
Mm.
And I think that they wanted out. So I think that is why that happened. As far as, a combination trip for the king, that is simply not on the cards. There's such a strong separation for the king and other members of the royal family, Prince William and Catherine, the Duchess of well, now the Princess of Wales. There's such a strong separation between them understanding their work and personal things. They would very not likely never combine a trip to California with those objectives. And I think, to be honest, California has become a bit radioactive for them with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex there. So I just
Man,
don't
it would
see
have
that in the cards.
it would have totally negated this incredible trip, you
That's
know?
right. I mean, I think it's very difficult to keep to your objectives when and you bring in that issue. Those are for them, those are very separate things. And there's all sorts of questions of cost and all that kind of thing that would have come up. I mean, the Canadian government was not about to send a plane to continue on to California and back, right? We just simply weren't going to do that.
No. I do have a question. In the United States, very similar to what you said. I have people that just love the king. They just love British royalty and they're going to support it no matter what. But occasionally I do run into the 90s tabloid lovers that say, I can't believe what he did to Princess Diana. I can't believe what Queen Camilla did to Princess Diana. Do you still have some of those whispers? Are there still people that are really fixated on the past? Or do you think most people are sympathetic towards his cancer, are sympathetic because they feel like the grenades are coming out of Montecito and they just, wish him well? Have you seen that evolution?
I've seen the evolution. I think Canadians are not unlike a lot of Americans where those issues are still very present in their mind. And I simply remind people that the king has now been married to Camilla for longer than he was married to Diana.
Yeah.
And of course, his lifelong relationship with her is, in many decades. And I think we've seen a very dramatic change in the king since he did get married to the Queen Camilla. So I just think people need to consider, in their own lives, they see people who were in marriages that they possibly should not have been in, and that they flourish in a second relationship or flourish outside that marriage. And I think people need to give that kind of grace to the king and the queen. And at this point, I don't think any interest is really served by continuing to beat that drum because it's a sad history, it's a tragic history. There were mistakes made on all sides. Obviously, the king was older than Diana. He should not have got into that situation, but he did. Here we are, and we have to move on. And I think that's the only thing we can say. I do think there's sympathy for the king because of his cancer and the way he's handling it, which is, typical British kind of stiff upper lip and carry on. But I think he still will not win over the full populace ever because of this issue. And I think that's why his son and daughter-in-law are probably continue to be a lot more popular than he is.
Oh, I don't like to hear that. They're not here in the States, polling wise. They've taken quite a nosedive.
Yeah, except I'm referring to William and Catherine.
Oh, okay. Thank God. I was like, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Well, that was one of my questions, but I will just say, because I don't want anybody to think I'm disparaging Queen Camilla, the best PR comeback of all time. I mean, the way that she is so adored today is really impressive and should be studied quite a bit. If Meghan Markle's looking for anything to research now that she's told us she's taking a break from As Ever until 2026, check out Queen Camilla's comeback story because it's pretty great. I did want to ask, do you think that Canada will be confident in a King William reign?
I think it will be, well, again, hard to say when it comes to us. I mean, it seems it will be probably sooner than it would have been were it not for, the cancer diagnosis and everything else. We don't really know, and we hope that the king lives long. But I mean, the notion of him living like his parents did, I think, is a bit difficult to imagine at the moment. I think that there is a lot of interest in William and Catherine. I think for us in Canada, it's going to be interesting to see how they develop that relationship with the country. They've been here a few times, but not that many. And of course, their priority has been their children and their children's upbringing, and that really drives their schedule a lot. I think if we start to see them here and start to see them interacting with Canadians, I think it would be a very popular moment. But it's very difficult to predict the future, and there's a lot of factors that are coming in the years ahead. And Canada will reconsider at some point its relationship with the whole institution, and then we will see how that leaves a future reign.
I did forget to ask you to bring your crystal ball, so I apologize for that. One final question: did you have any other highlights from King Charles's trip? Any visuals that really stood out to you, or any quirky moments that you thought, he's got a great personality, or we're really lucky to have him here.
I think what's again, and I've had a privilege of, being behind closed doors and being there when the cameras are off, and a few things like that. I do think, I don't know how much you saw it, but the airport departure, which was not kind of official, not very formal. Um, there was a few groups that wanted to make sure they got photographs with the king and queen before they left. The crew of the aircraft, all the Canadian Forces staff that were on the Royal Canadian aircraft jet, they obviously know that when they were going to land in London, it was going to be the middle of the night. So they wanted a photograph. The motorcycle escorts wanted a photograph. The Royal Tour staff, the people that I, was part of, and that's usually a scheduled moment that there's a group photograph that people really value and treasure for any trip that they've worked on. So when they got to the airport, there was all these things happening, and the king is quite love to chat with people, and if he knows someone, he will chat quite a bit with them. And it was very interesting watching him go from photo, and it was the queen who was kind of dragging him, saying like, "Okay, we've got to move on. This group is waiting." And like they were walking quite a different parts of around the aircraft. These people were, significant distance from each other, and she was dragging, and I thought it was just a really telling moment of their relationship. And sort of like, I thought to myself, okay, she's read the program. She knows everything that has to happen. He has not. And she is going to make sure that he does all the things he needs to do before, so they can get on the plane because everyone's waiting to get on that plane and get going. And obviously there's other, like, the departure time of that aircraft affects so many people, right? So I just thought it was a very telling moment, that just how kind of on top of things she is and the role she plays in that relationship. She's spoken a few times about if anyone can get, if anyone can get the king to ramp down his schedule and take it easy a bit more, like let her know, because she's been unable to do it. And I thought that was very telling, and just how he took time with people, and she kind of as the one that had to. It wasn't officials that was moving him along; it was her. I mean, that's normally our role. So I
Yeah.
thought that was a really interesting moment about their relationship. I mean, there were other great visuals, obviously the war memorial, the Landau and with the RCMP, to the Parliament, the crowds at the farmers market, which the King and the Queen love things like that. And there were just so many little moments. But I thought that was, for me, I really really enjoyed that they left the cameras going for that, and we saw that departure, which was not meant to be on television at all.
Yeah, that's such a great point because she truly is. I think history will be kinder about that story. She really is the yin to his yang, and I just think that his life, she helps keep him organized, and they laugh together so much. And I love Princess Diana, but I look at those two and I see soulmates. And you just describing that is exactly, soulmates.
Yeah.
Her, come on, let's go. We got to go. We have to keep the schedule. Her staying on top of everything, and him just having that trust in her. So, this has been so much fun to talk to you. You're very on television. I did not know that you were going to be so fun to talk to because you are very official on TV. So this has been so fun to have this time with you, Richard. I'm so grateful to you. If we're watching in the States, can we watch you regularly on CTV News's YouTube page? Is that how we can kind of keep up with some of your commentary
I'm not sure how they post it all the time. I mean, you can. I mean, again, my involvement with CTV is kind of, as events happen, right? As things happen, and bigger stories, and sometimes the reporters cover them, and sometimes they need analysis, right? Because you need what we used to call Kremlinologists. You need palaceologists who kind of can figure out what the palace is saying between the lines, because the royal family don't speak a lot, right? So It's you're welcome to. I'm happy. I'm surprised that you are so interested in the peculiarities of the monarchy in Canada because it's a very you have to really kind of understand how it's working here, and it works in a very different way. But we're always happy to talk about aspects of our country, and this is part of our history and our heritage in this country.
Absolutely. Well, Richard Berthelsen, it's been such a pleasure to get to know you and to learn how to say lieutenant, Lieu-
Lieutenant,
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 lieutenant.
lieutenant.
Okay. All right. I will never forget now. Um, I really enjoyed your commentary and this conversation. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me.
Okay, my pleasure.
Bye.